We give our first impressions of the redesigned 2020 Nissan Sentra. We talk about a few of the wild concept cars at CES. We answer audience questions, including, is it ever a good idea to buy a retread tire? Next on Talking Cars. Hi, and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Emily Thomas.
And I'm John Lincove.
So the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas is going on right now. And over the last several years, car concepts, car technology has really been in the forefront. We've seen a number of wild concepts, and we thought we'd spend a little bit of time on Talking Cars talking about some of these concepts, including one called the Byton M-Byte. And this is a Chinese-based electronic vehicle company. So one of the highlights of the Byton M-Byte is an enormous interior screen, kind of makes what Tesla produces pretty pedestrian. Another model that we are looking at is the Fisker Ocean. Kind of looks a little bit like a Tesla Model X, and we've certainly heard the name Fisker before. Yep. Another model that kind of caught our eye is a pretty wild concept from Mercedes, the Vision Avatar, or maybe they call it the Avatar, since the connection is with James Cameron, who had a hand in the development of this, a little movie tie-in there. And finally, we're looking at a car from a non-car company. Sony showed a car that is called, I think they're calling it the Vision S. They call it an example of future mobility, encompassing the evolution of safety, comfort, entertainment, and adaptability all in one car. Which ones, any of these kind of jump out at you guys?
I mean, I think even just looking at that Avatar car, I know we've heard people in other shows or just in general when they talk about more autonomous driving, about all these different seating configurations that, we can, face each other or whatever. But even this Avatar car, everyone was still facing forward, which I thought was interesting, that they're putting out their futuristic design and they still have traditional seating, which to me, that makes sense from an engineering standpoint. But I don't necessarily see the practicality of these concept vehicles. Like, I get the creative exercise. I understand, why it could be fun to just think way out of the box. And, if we could make cars like this tomorrow, this is how we think they would be.
Right, but they cost a fair amount of money to produce, and the technology doesn't always necessarily reach a consumer audience.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the cost. I don't think they're worried about the cost of production. It's
clearly
it's a line item in the greater scheme for some of these companies. Look, Sony's showing all of its different technologies that it has. That
was basically a commercial on wheels.
Well, right. So it's showing we have all these capabilities. We already work with a number of suppliers, a number of automakers. So Mercedes with its car, it's showing a lot of artificial intelligence, which is almost the best way to use AI, in my opinion, in that it's not taking away someone else's task. There's a worry going off the rails here of taking away jobs because of AI. Here, it's helping out with the use of the car and the car's, some autonomy, et cetera. Look, a lot of it's also going to be, in my opinion, looking out for money. Before it was automakers competing with other automakers for money by showing, well, this is our next 1957 car or the 1974 car. Don't buy the 73, and their car looks old, and come to the dealership. Now a lot of it is, here's what we have, here's our technology, we're going to be great, we need more money.
But back to your question, Emily, one of my favorite stories about concept cars, and John, you'll definitely remember this, was back in the 90s, Chrysler showed its first Dodge Viper. And this is like, a throwback to the old Ford Shelby Cobra. And it got such a reaction from the press and the general public that, if I'm remembering the story right, that the executives at Chrysler went back, kind of scratched their heads and said, maybe we should build this. And the Viper actually came to fruition.
Right.
So it's not all for nothing, but I totally get where you're coming from. It's like these things are so out there that they're never going to be on American roads.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's kind of, how does this matter to the consumer? Right? To your average consumer, not the person who's going to necessarily be able to afford these, super high-end, very gizmo-y kind of vehicles, but to just your average driver. What does this mean for them? Is this something they're actually going to see? Like, I remember a couple of years ago, like when I first started here, we saw this Volvo concept. It was like an integrated rear-facing car seat into your front passenger seat. So like the mom could sit in the back and then have the baby facing them. And I was like, that's kind of cool, just from the idea of like having integrated car seats, and now you're taking away the misuse of, incorrect installations. But it's not something that we're actually seeing come out in the marketplace, So to me, it's almost a little bit frustrating. I'm like, oh, great, you've engineered a solution that I'm never going to see in real life.
The lead time, I think, is a big thing. Look at Michelin showing the Tweel, which is the solid wheel. It takes away the air inside of it. They're still working on that down the road. You're going to see some elements of these cars. It's all wrapped in a futuristic, fancy wrapping. And in the past, manufacturers would hide some stuff underneath. We're out of sight. I mean, I remember Porsche introduced its all-wheel drive system decades ago by hiding it kind of underneath a car at an auto show, and only astute people who happen to look underneath said, hey, wait a second. It's got front drive as well.
It's got the drive shaft going all the way up the car. That's
so
new.
You're going to see some things like that. Yes, it's not going to have this flipping seats now, and that comes and goes. That's to get people to talk about it, in my opinion. But a lot of the smaller technology, maybe even the screen, is not going to show up.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a screen controlling everything.
So maybe we'll see some of it.
Yeah.
It'll eventually come to us.
So that's kind of our quick wrap-up of what's going at the Consumer Electronics Show. We'll have more at consumerreports.org, so check out our coverage there. Which moves us on to the next segment, which we're going to talk about, is what we're driving this week. And we've decided to talk about the Nissan Sentra. This is redesigned for 2020. We rented one of the top shelf models from Nissan. This is a pretty high-end, a high-volume vehicle competing with the Subaru Impreza, Toyota Corolla, Honda Civic, Mazda 3, and that sort. So, John, tell us a little bit more about this car.
I think the biggest news about this car, besides being updated after a number of years, is the standard safety features. Nissan's done a good job of introducing forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, even with pedestrian detection, blind spot warning in their car's standard equipment. And it's a big thing because some manufacturers have in the past not equip their base model with that, or they put it as part of an option package. You have to get those features, or some of those features. It's big. The Sentra wasn't very impressive. The previous generation, our testing, falling at the bottom of the compact car category.
We called it a joyless driving experience. I love that line.
And it does happen. A car may be mediocre in our testing, but as things improve, they keep pushing down. So it's going down because it's just not keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak.
Right. Part of that could be just, as you guys said, it hadn't been redesigned in many years. So with how quickly technology is turning around in the automotive industry, like to wait a 6-7 year gap between redesigns,
that's an eternity.
That will push you down just by nature of the industry right now.
Now, we've all driven it. Emily, you drove it last night. What did you think?
It was kind of meh. Even for me, it just sort of kind of took me back to my old Corolla that I drove in grad school. It's good for getting you around, like it will do the job of being a transportation vehicle. But if you are a more car person, or you just really want to be able to enjoy your vehicle, this might not be the car for that. It's kind of why I laughed at your joyless driving.
That's
because I was like,
that's how we talked about the last one.
I mean, it's sort of accurate, but at the same time, I am glad to see the safety features. Nissan put out a few years ago their rear door alert, which is the occupant reminder system for the back seat, right? It's a heat stroke prevention technology. So, it comes equipped with that. Unfortunately, Nissan still hasn't changed that to be a factory default on system. So you do actually have to go in and enable it, which I did last night. And then it went off on me during the drive-through, but.
and a little background, Doc M is expert in child safety and child safety seats. So that's why we're going with, it's what we have. We have you here for a number of reasons, but we're glad
it's hard to not notice those things. But also I noticed that it has, a rear seatbelt reminder, which I think is great for, especially if you guys are saying that it's such a high volume vehicle, then something that's going to be on the driver dash that notifies the driver if a rear passenger, unbuckles, whether that's, their booster age kid or teenager or, just another adult, just because rear seatbelt usage is so low in the US. And, that's your basic way of staying as safe as possible in the car. So like seeing things like that is exciting on such like an affordable kind of, car that a lot of families are going to be driving. And I think that's great. So even if it isn't like super wowing of a vehicle, it has a lot of these really good ingredients that are I think, really key to keeping families safe on the road.
The version that you see in the footage and that we drove is the top trim SR. And it's going to be a small percentage of the number of the volume of Sentras sold. But even in the middle and base level, you still get a vehicle that has a very low dash and a very low hood. So front visibility is great. Visibility of the corners a little bit is a little blocked by the thick pillars, roof pillars, A-pillars, and the mirror. That's a little more challenging. But overall, easy to see out of. Fine to drive. I mean, you say fine, and it's almost as if you're damning it with faint praise, but it's a fine car. It's not exciting, but it certainly is not offensive. Great accessibility to the controls, the climate controls, as well as the infotainment screen. It's a disappointment that the base version of the car does not get standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but if you opt for that, it's in there. One additional feature that you like. The rear seat's pretty roomy for a compact car. It's a nice car. It's not going to set your pulses, raise your pulse, excitement level, but it's not meant for that. 149
horsepower, 2-liter engine. EPA says about 32 miles per gallon overall. I thought, considering that this is the top shelf Sentra, I was really disappointed with the seat. I thought it had really light thigh support. It wasn't a great seat, and I thought if this is the best Sentra and this is the best the seats are, that was not quite a deal breaker for me, but I really didn't like the seat that much.
The biggest thing I feel is it has a lot of nice leather, fake leather, stitch trim, soft materials. But the center console, even with all that, it's very hard. My knee's against it. For me, it's a minor thing. I'm okay with the car. Would I drive it over a Corolla? Potentially. Seeing how it tests out, seeing what the mid-level version is like.
And speaking of testing, we'll be buying our own Sentra soon. So check out consumerreports.org for our first drive and more test results coming up when we get our own Sentra. Next up is our favorite part of the podcast, taking your questions, which we love. Keep them coming, text and video questions to talkingcars@icloud.com. That's talkingcars@icloud.com. First up is Paul from California, who writes, I recently watched a documentary on tires, and it claimed buying retread tires is the sustainable way to go without compromising quality. What is your opinion of retread tires? Now, Emily, not only did you research this question, but you actually physically sit next to a lot of our tire testers in our offices.
Yeah, I basically just yelled over my cubicle wall and Gene Peterson brain dumped onto me, so it was great. So I did get to learn what a retread tire is because I did not actually know. And basically, it's a type of used tire, right? We can kind of put it under the used tire category. And what they do is they take old tire carcasses and they vulcanize new treads onto them, which is basically the way that they cook the new rubber treads on, right? And because it falls under the category of used tires, the general advice is don't buy used tires. Right. You don't know the history of a used tire, so you should always buy new tires. And even furthermore, I'm not entirely sure if in this documentary, that he saw, they were talking about the retreading of passenger car tires, which Gene says is really rare, actually, because especially now, modern passenger car tires are designed to last a lot longer, right? They can go for like approximately 100,000 miles or more. And the cost of a retread tire is essentially comparable to an economy new tire. So why buy used if you can get new, right, for like the same price? And additionally, the concerns that he really had were that because you're taking these old tire carcasses, right? One, you don't know the integrity of that carcass. You don't really know how good it is when they put the new treads on. And then two, you could essentially end up for your car with 4 retread tires that came from 4 different manufacturers. And so now you have this problem of like unmatched tires. And he was like, that will really have an unknown effect on like the ride, on handling, on like the general performance of the vehicle and the tires together, right? So again, Gene Peterson always says, always buy new tires. He does not recommend this as an option. And really, it doesn't sound like it's even a viable option for you to purchase passenger car tires that are retreads.
Right, and John, we've often said, tires are not the place to pinch pennies when it comes to cars.
No, I mean, you don't have to buy a top-rated Michelin, which tend to be more expensive. You could buy a mid-level rated tire. It's far better than having mismatched tires, riding on bald tires.
Yeah.
And it's, again, I've done this before. Like, there's 4 of these holding your car on the road. 4 handprints are basically the contact patch.
Yep.
It's not the place to mess around.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent question. We always get a lot of tire questions. I wish we could get to more of them. But next, we've got a question from Nancy, who says, the Toyota RAV4 was recently put through the famous Moose test in Sweden and failed to get the minimum score. I know CR does a similar test. How do they compare? How did the RAV4 perform in your test? So, Emily, we're back to you with a great answer that you've got for Nancy.
Yeah, I got to learn a lot during this podcast prep. So the Moose test is a test that's conducted in Sweden, as she said, and it's a type of avoidance maneuver testing, which, yes, we do our own avoidance maneuver testing, right? There are differences between our test and the Swedish test. So I'm basically just going to go in depth on ours, really. So ours is meant to evaluate emergency handling, right? We use a dry road condition, track temperatures between 40 and 100 degrees. We only have the driver in the vehicle. Here's where there is a difference between the Moose test. Theirs is loaded to full capacity. We also only use steering input when we enter the course. So there's no braking, no acceleration, right? ESC is on. And basically you just continue to go through the course, increasing speed until one of the cones gets knocked over. And really the scenario that we're trying to imitate are these emergency type scenarios where, like, if you have a child or an object that kind of darts into the road from the right side, now you have to steer away from it, but you steer into, the oncoming traffic lane. You realize you now have oncoming traffic. You got to steer back into your original lane. So it's a very quick maneuver, but it happens at high speeds, 50 to 55 miles per hour. In talking with our vehicle testers, I learned that, we used to do a short course and a long course. We only do the long course now. We stopped doing the short course essentially when electronic stability control became available on vehicles and when the government started to do their own stability testing. So it was no longer needed for us to do that. And, I checked in with Jake, our director of testing, to kind of see what our take is on this Moose test results and, how we feel about how the RAV4 performed in our own testing. He said that our avoidance maneuver test is pretty severe and the RAV4 was stable throughout the test. So obviously there's going to be some differences between, road conditions, tire conditions, even just the tuning of the vehicles between the European market and the US market.
Different tires.
Right. Mm-hmm. So he's like, you can expect there to be differences. But he said that, between the avoidance maneuver and our other track testing, that he wouldn't hesitate to get a RAV4 based on those concerns of emergency handling on their test. It's Jake, so
well, right.
If that's what he says, then that's what we go with.
And I'm glad you brought it back to our testing, and because Nancy asked, how did the RAV4 perform your test? And the regular RAV4 did about 54 miles an hour in our emergency avoidance maneuver, which is pretty good. The hybrid, which we also tested, has different tires, and it posted 52 miles an hour, so maybe a little bit less grip with the hybrid tires because they're geared more to fuel economy.
Yeah, a little less grip, improved rolling resistance, so that it takes less energy to make them go, and they'll continue to roll on. So it helps fuel economy, but they don't have as much grip, like you said. So that makes total sense. I mean, look, it's an avoidance maneuver at the end. It's not apples to apples.
Right. Exactly.
That's important.
Particularly because you said about, and totally right, it's at full capacity, full load capacity for the vehicle, not how we do it. Take a look between the two and you can make a decision. We've done this for years, and everything for us at least is apples to apples the way we test the cars.
And I think another big thing, I'm not sure where Nancy lives and where she's trying to buy her vehicle, but consumer information programs, like ours and, like this Swedish test, they are intended to address the market that they're for, right? And so if you are in the US, it might not make as much sense to compare test results with consumer information testing that's happening in another part of the world where their market's different, the vehicles are designed differently, the safety regulations are different, So just keeping that in mind, it's always great to research and learn more. I think it's just important for us to make sure that while it's great to research and learn about the cars that we want to buy, that we're not making an apples to apples comparison of something that's not actually apples to apples,
Excellent. Thanks for all you guys' hard work on that. And that was a tough question to answer. Next up is Matt, who writes, "The lease on my current car is coming to an end, and I'm thinking about getting a Tesla Model 3 next. However, I live in Boston and park my car on the street. I'm concerned about whether the Model 3's battery will be able to survive the long winter without a garage or home charging. I would drive the car once or twice a week, and I think I'd charge it every other week or so. Do you think I could make this work?" Wow, a lot of tough scenarios for a potential EV owner, John. What advice do you have for Matt?
So he asks if we'll be able to survive the long winter. I can't answer the survival. I can't answer, or we can't answer, it's going to only have a 4-year lifespan, out there.
Yeah.
But the key things I think to think about are, I'm going to move to my other notes, how much time what the range is going to be. Because you're parking in the city, he can take it. It doesn't sound like he's driving 200 miles or 100 miles out of the city, but he's using it infrequently. The key thing really is that the range is going to be low. It's going to be lower because of the cold weather, but mostly because he's going to have to use the car when it's cold, and the battery's going to have to heat the car fully. And it's going from a super cold state. So we did our own evaluations of a situation like how cold temperatures affect electric vehicles, and it's on consumerreports.org. So check it out. It's a Model 3 and a Nissan Leaf, not the Plus. In January 2019, it was right around between 0 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit. As temperatures drop, 2 and below freezing, demand on the battery increases. You have to use heaters and the defrosters more. Demand on the battery increases. The best way to combat this is to keep it plugged in so that when you go and precondition the car, it's using the wall electricity versus the battery. Once you're doing a preconditioning, which is what the manufacturers suggest, you're going to hurt the range on that. It warms the cabin, it warms the battery, which helps as well. The advice really, use the heated seats, use the heated steering wheel. If you could plug in, that's going to give you a longer range. You unlock more range in the vehicle when you precondition it. It's not damaging, but you're just not going to get the range. Our full information's on consumerreports.org. The basic, we took three trips on each one of 21 miles each. The car sat for an hour outside in between the two trips. They lost range. It's not going to necessarily damage. The manufacturers don't say it's going to damage, but you're going to have less range.
This is a kind of an interesting scenario for Matt because he doesn't drive a car very much.
Yeah.
And he's almost like he wants the most challenging situation of car ownership. Parking it on the street, having to plug it in, but not being able to plug in. Maybe he should even consider a different car.
Possibly. The way I read that question, just from having lived in a city and having to street park my car all the time, part of me was kind of getting palpitations about this is an expensive vehicle that's now going to be on the public road, parked, waiting for anybody to sideswipe it at any moment. And, just, do you want to even expose your expensive car to that kind of abuse, where people, it's city driving. You're going to have people that are kind of in real close. Right. And it's just...
It almost sounds to me like Matt is a perfect candidate for a good used car that you don't necessarily care a lot about.
It's unless he is driving huge mileage between charges, I don't think it's a worry. If he's, what some of the numbers we had, the Tesla Model 3 is an EPA estimated 310 mile range. At the end of a 64 mile drive, ours indicated there were 189 miles of range. It used a lot of range in only 64 miles, because of the heating. The Leaf ended up at the end of our 64 mile drive with 10 miles of predicted range. EPA predicts at 151. So as long as you're not saying, I'm going to get in my car and it's going to be below freezing and I'm going to drive 151 miles, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But if you're doing 20 miles, if you're driving around the city of Boston, if you're going out a little bit,
driving around the city of Boston, now you have to deal with parking.
It should be okay. You should be okay.
And maybe that's just it. Maybe you just make a habit of, right now he's planning to only drive the car once or twice a week. Well, maybe you kind of change that up and you do drive it a little bit more frequently, or get to a charger more frequently.
So you can hit a charger somewhere. That would
right.
be key.
If this is really what you want to do, here are the tips on how to do it.
Exactly. Yep.
Don't do it maybe the way you said you're going to.
Right.
We recommend some changes to that plan.
This is three parents talking right now. If you really want to do this,
you can. Okay. It's just not going to be great.
Okay, finally, we wrap this up with a question from Dan from New York, who writes, just started listening to the podcast and loving it. Thanks, Dan. I was wondering, what do you do with the cars you buy after you're done testing them? This is my most frequently asked question ever, John. What do you got for Dan?
The short answer is we put 2,000 miles on the car, we test it, we then hold it. We hold it for a number of reasons. We continue to evaluate it and see how it is after broken in, see if there's any updates, because there's more over-the-air updates that are available going forward with cars. We also hold them to see if manufacturers have a question about our test results and want to come out here and either look at the car or have us, talk about it. Finally, what we do is we sell the vehicle or trade it in. We put it open to basically friends and family at Consumer Reports. And, we set a price around wholesale price or so, because if it doesn't sell, people don't want it. We send it out to a wholesaler, like the auctions or something like that, or we'll trade it into a dealership who again are going to give us wholesale price on the vehicle. So that's pretty much it. It goes out into the public, and we also really try to keep them in good condition because we know we're selling the car. Yeah. So it isn't, they're not ball tires and filled with Coke cans. They're actually, for the most part, kept in really great condition and low miles.
And a number of us that work here at the track have purchased cars for our spouses, our family, or whatnot. My wife drives a 2002 Camry, which is an ex-test car. But again,
my father drives a 2006 Corvette Z06 that was a test car, and I know there was a lot of hard driving on that. So
we get this question asked a whole lot, so it's always good to answer that one for Dan and for everyone else out there. And really, that's going to do it for this episode. As always, check the show notes for more information on the cars and the topics that we talked about. We really appreciate you tuning in. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.